Welcome back. Another week of Podding with PT.
I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tyler. And we got a special guest on today. Travis, if you want to go ahead and give yourself just a little brief introduction on what you do, where you're from.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. I'm Travis. I'm a yoga instructor from Kailua, Hawaii. And throughout the past 5 or so years, I've just been teaching yoga, meditation, breathwork, and different modalities of healing, which ultimately does cross anatomical understanding. And that's why I think that it's such a great crossover with the physical therapy aspect and the yoga aspect, where they align, where they come together, is space for not just healing physically, but also mentally, energetically, and more. So I'm really excited to be on. Yeah, let's just get into it. If you have anything you want to know, or just let me know what you want to know from a yoga perspective or anything like that.
I think so. So first, I just want to say, so I met Travis back at Sacred Heart. So played volleyball. Travis then ended up going back to Hawaii. So I want to know kind of how you got into the yoga part, because I knew you from volleyball, and then also Travis did Best Buddies also with me. So that was another way that I got a chance to connect with him. So it works with people who are mentally and physically disabled, and it gives you like an opportunity to be friends with them. And just kind of show them some different experiences.
No, so I think we were together, till 2016. So in 2016, I had never even heard of yoga. And I was at the end of what I call my volleyball career. So basically, I just stopped playing volleyball. And from that point on, I decided I need to do something for my body. I think coming at the end of my volleyball career, my body was a little, what I call broken. Right, it wasn't fully healthy, and I think we could get into a little bit of the physical side of it, but volleyball wasn't conducive to the body that I had, or at least the weightlifting regimen and all that. And I think that a lot of things in my body were kind of out of place. So I went to yoga as a way to just like stretch, because that's what I thought it was. That's a foot in the door. And from that first yoga class, I kind of realized there's more to understand here. It's not just stretching. There's a little bit of mental side of yoga. There's an energetic side that you can't really understand, but you can feel. And I kind of got, I don't want to say addicted to it, but I got roped in from that first class, because here I was thinking that I was feeling my physical body. And what I realized is that, I'm healing my mind, because a lot of that stuff that you don't process, it just sits there waiting for you to get into it. So that's a great parallel to where society is. Because society is always going to step in the door first for the body, right? Where can we heal our body? Can we heal our physical form? Can we be more healthy? And then we realize that health is really not something that we can find physically, but kind of a state of being, like to be healthy, right? And that's what I found from yoga. So I started right at the end of 2016. My sister took me to a 2-week free trial, and I'll do anything my sister says. So she said, wake up at 7 a.m. one day and we're going to yoga. And, I was like, I never heard of yoga. I think about this often. And when Tyler and I were in school together, I don't know if yoga really ever crossed our mind in the sense of that word, right? No. That word yoga, like we stretch. We did some great stretch and some partner stretches that are very similar to like yoga teachers, how one-on-one sessions can look. But it just wasn't in my field of experience. So I didn't know what I was stepping into. And she brought me to a class at 8 a.m. that was actually a yoga with weights class. And this is a thing that kind of humbled me, coming from that.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like we're coming
especially
from that like athletic. Exactly. Yeah. And you think, you're cleaning, you're doing all these crazy weights, Tyler more so than me. I was always on like the last rack, where we lifted the lightest amount of weight, but still more weight than a 5-pound dumbbell. And you grab that 5-pound dumbbell and you're going through class and you're gassed. You're done. You got to put those weights down, and you look around, and this is where the ego steps in, because you see people that perceivably look like they are not as fit as you, doing more than you, doing it for longer than you. And you're like, what is going on here? So straight up took my piece of humble pie. I was like, man, there's something to be had here. And that kind of kept me going back, because I was in that mindset. Tyler, I'm sure you can allude to this, through like volleyball, where you do kind of have to perform. And you're like, that was a bad performance. And you either run away and say you never want to do that again, or you kind of like want to double down and say, I can do better. And that's where it was for a long time. It was this idea that you could do better at yoga. And I've come to find out you can't really do better. It's a fallacy in thinking that, but I'm glad that my frame of mind was that at the time. So that I came back to the next class. I want to do better than I did last class. And it became a thing where I get 20 minutes through class and I got to hit that child's pose, right? I got to like come down to my mat and just chill out. And then it became 25 minutes. And that's kind of the process, the journey that I fell in love with was, wow, I'm getting further through this class before I get physically, what we talk about is like into the anaerobic process that makes you have to hit that mat. Right. So I'm staying in my aerobic respiration for a little bit longer to make it more longer through class, make it further through class. And that's what I like to see, that progress, because I was in that frame of mind that like progress was everything. You know, progress when you're lifting weights, putting on an extra 5 pounds and doing it 5 pounds more than you could the day before. So I found that same process through yoga at a time where everything else got stripped away. You know, you're no longer an athlete. And I think we all struggle with that. Like when you go through college athletics, you think that that is it. You come out of college athletics, you don't have an identity as much anymore. And you're trying to figure out, who am I now? You know, I put all my weight, all my stake in this label of an athlete. And now there's no athletics for me to play at a competitive level. So like, who am I now? You know, and that's where I found myself as I am now this person that practices yoga. And eventually, after that 2-week period that my sister took me to, signed up for training and taught yoga like as soon as I could, because I just wanted other people in my community, you know, in our community, Tyler and Pat, I'm sure you see this too, that don't get exposure to these things. You know, that think of it, you hear the term yoga and you think of it like consumerism of yoga leggings, or, you know, like something that like is for middle class people that have expendable income. You know, so you don't get the exposure to like my community is like the Hawaiian community, right? And they hear yoga and they think that's not something that we do here. And then bringing it into a space that they're invited into the practice too was my driving force, because it does have something for everyone. They just have to know what foot to slide in the door, or how to hold that door open for that community to step in.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
So going off of that, so as an athlete, you're going into this. And so for my patients, they ask me, hey, would yoga be good to help my arm get better? And I say yes, just because like I know there's so much that goes into yoga. So like the breath work, so just being able to breathe through movement and the stability of it. But kind of the question is, how do you view yoga, like the definition? So if I'm talking to someone, like, what do I kind of explain it as?
Yeah. Well, that's a large question, because that word is, you know, I like to think that anything and everything can be considered yoga, right? This conversation that we're having right now, it's yoga, because yoga, from a standpoint of transliteration, means to yoke, right? Like how cattle were yoked to a cart, to tie together, to unite. So really it is that union that is what yoga at its fundamental level is. Now, how you get there, there's so many pathways that could be considered yoga. And what I like to say, you know, and this could be applicable to you, Pat, with your patients, what I like to say to each and every person is different. Because if yoga is all of it, right? If yoga is just a way to like merge with ourselves, with mind, body, spirit, with whatever you want to term that as, you can change that definition to apply to the individual. So when I'm working with young tennis stars, I'll find a tennis player that does yoga. And I'll say, oh, you want to be like that person, right? And then I'm working with MMA people, and in Hawaii, Max Holloway does yoga. And I'll say, oh, Max Holloway does yoga. And it intrinsically forms that connection to, oh, I want to be like Max Holloway. And Max Holloway does yoga. Okay, I'm more open to this yoga thing. So what I'll define yoga as for you and your patients is it's different for every single person. What they want to get out of it will be different. So speaking to what they need, yoga can fill that need in some way, right? So if they need relief in their shoulders, talk to the physical aspect of yoga. Yeah, yoga over time, I like to say, is the longest, most sustainable chiropractic adjustment. Because if you ever go through bone manipulation, it will work for a time, but you might need to go back until you get the muscles to strengthen the tendons to actually hold that bone in that joint in that way. So yoga is the same thing. You're just getting that space into the joints to allow the muscles to strengthen at a good anatomical alignment, so that over time it can hold better than it did before without pain and all that stuff. So physically, it's right there for you to talk to that. Now, energetically, mentally, and all that, I'd say meet them where they are, right? If they're coming to you as a PT, I think they're coming for something physical that doesn't feel right or that needs to be worked on, or that's recovering from an injury. Talk to the physical aspects of yoga, and then let them slide that foot in the door of yoga and open up that door themselves and see all the breath work, see all the meditation, see all that benefits for themselves. But ultimately, we do have to let them see it for themselves. We can't like shove it down their throat like this is a good practice for, I think it is a practice that everyone can benefit something from. Some aspect of it can serve anyone. But if we just tell them that, you know, over and over again, it's not going to internalize. If we relate it to them and say, you're coming to me for your shoulder, well, let me tell you about how yoga can kind of work on whatever you need worked on in that shoulder, whether it be to actually shorten some muscles for more stability or to lengthen some muscles for more mobility. Yoga can do both, depending on how you use the practice.
Yeah, I think you speak to some great points there, even still like the physical aspect, because I, like you said, so coming from college and you're used to having a structured routine, and it's more so for volleyball. For us, it's a lot of strength and power. We didn't honestly talk too much about mobility, and that's I think a knock a little bit that I had on that is there are times where I had some pains where I was like, if I just learned how to do more stretching or certain mobility stuff, then I think I would have been a better athlete and felt better. So I kind of, looking back on it, wish I had something like yoga or dug a little bit deeper into the practice to understand like, oh, this is what my body should feel like. And like, even though I do have these aches and pains, although they are common, they're not normal, kind of like how what Jojo was saying last time. But I took a hot yoga class when I first moved to California. And like you said, that definitely humbled me. And it's crazy because I go through some of these classes and I feel like I've been more shape than most people that I see going there. Yet I'll see these 50-year-old women that are over here handling like 8-pound weights, and I'm here with 5s and I'm struggling. Like, I'm like, this makes no sense to me. But I think kind of with the practice of yoga, it helps you really internalize some things, and you're able to control those voices in your head. So like for me, I had a very weak will where it was like, damn, this weight's heavy. Is like, I don't want to lift this anymore. Let me just take that break. Whereas when you're in through that internal mindset, you're able to say, okay, I know that this weight is heavy. I'm able to observe it, but then also control my thoughts to make sure I can continue to go. There are certain times when your body says, yeah, I can't do this anymore. But it's like, I think that's a great thing that I learned, because especially with hot yoga, it's like the room is hot. It's like, that's the easiest thing to tell you to either like lay down or like get out of the room. But you kind of battle with those voices in your head and you're like, okay. So I think that'll be good to even tell patients like, hey, go try a practice. I'll tell you the physical aspects. And like you said, I can find through my own mindset, okay, how do I talk to the voices in my head, especially when it comes to now dealing with the pandemic, dealing with work, all these certain things. So the biochemical aspect of it, I feel like is pretty huge, because although it may be, now I'm learning to deal with the voices in my head, but that can stop me from having shallow breathing. It can stop me from having that arch in my back, because now I can understand, okay, what is this telling me? What do I feel like? And now just kind of change my body mechanics, change how I feel about certain things, and then impact the physical mindset.
Yeah. No, I think that you're absolutely right. And what ultimately yoga is predicated upon is the stilling of what is called the chitta in yoga. And that's the intelligence, the mind, and the ego, right? And these aspects, the intelligence and the mind and the ego, are what are called finite. Right. So it's like they will fade with the body that has the brain, and all those functions of the brain will fade with the body. So we often tell ourselves these stories like, I have to stop now to protect ourselves, to protect our ego. Right. We put down the weight before we actually need to. And you see this with free divers a lot of the time, our body starts to say we need air before we actually need that air. So free diving is a practice of learning how to retrain your body to understand it is okay, or retrain your mind to understand that your body can do more than you think it can. So that idea of kind of stepping out of the mind and into the intelligence of the body is very important, because the body ultimately is very wise in its own knowing and in its own ability to one day find homeostasis, right? And I think that that's what health is physically. It's your body back in homeostasis. Now, all these other things, the buzzings of the body, this is sore, that's trying to encourage you to come back to that homeostasis. You know, something doesn't feel right in my hip, in that whether it's into the femur, into the ilium compression, something like that, or just muscular wise, something doesn't feel right, it's tingling. Let me seek some advice to find that homeostasis. And that is what I think is lacking in a lot of, I want to say like macho sports, for lack of a better term, right? Those sports that you just got to lift as much as you can. I found out later after I left Sacred Heart that I have at the top of my lumbar vertebrae, the top two kind of stay in kyphosis a little bit longer than scooping right down into lordosis. So a front squat for me, actually with the bar right across my chest, as I come down, my tailbone isn't as scooped back, and therefore I got a lot of load right into my erector spinae, right? It's like trying to scoop forward, and my erector spinae is trying to hold that back, but naturally my body wants to fall forward with that front squat, because I don't got that same lumbar lordosis that will help counteract all of that load in a stacked way, right? Our spine's very smart that it kind of diffuses the load throughout the curvature of the vertebrae. Now, with not the same curvature as everyone else, that load was elsewhere, and it always felt weird. And I could never go up in front squat weight, and I always felt kind of like a failure in that regard. But it was just, the body was never accounted for. The individual body was never accounted for. Every single person did the same workout. And as you know, as physical therapists, you pretty much never give the same prescription to multiple patients. You may use the same exercises, the same things, but your combination of them are different for each and every person, because it's what they need. And I think that's what it was lacking in a lot of our training in westernized sports, I'd say, is that the individual isn't as accounted for. We kind of group volleyball, and what are all the exercises for volleyball, and then go do those exercises, when really it should be the volleyball player. What are the exercises for that volleyball player? Now go do those exercises. So learning that, and just learning about my body, kind of coming to grace with my body, being like, man, I was never meant to front squat 225, and that's okay, you know, because it just didn't feel right in my body. Now modifications and physical therapy and all that could get you to that point one day, but telling yourself that you have to be at that point today, when you don't even understand the processes that could enable you to be at that point, is very detrimental to young athletes, I think, especially, right? Young athletes that are told, if you don't do this, you might not get as much playing time and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree with all those points, Tyler. And I think that it's so good that we had that similar experience to kind of look back on it and reflect. And I did a lot of reflecting in my time, and I just came to peace with a lot of, you know, it just wasn't right for me, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think you also touched on a pretty good point in talking about the body and being kind of whole. Can you touch a bit on like the chakras, or give I think like a quick and dirty version of the chakras, and maybe talk about what that may mean in your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So chakras are, the definition would be wheel. And you can think of it as a wheel of spinning energy where multiple energy channels connect to create that abundance of energy in one little channel. Now, the channels through which energy flows are called nadis, and they're very synonymous to nerves. Okay, so you have a lot of nerves, and I like to say synonymous versus exactly the same. A lot of people think that, you know, the people that created the chakra system thousands of years ago didn't dissect bodies to do so. They found all these things through deep meditation. and they kind of understood the processes of the body from that meditative state, which means that it wasn't exactly the same as when we dissected a body to find out what nerves are. But nadis carry energy through the body. Nerves do very similar things, right? They do neural impasses that you kind of transfer through sensory neurons, what is felt, right to the brain, then right back to the motor neurons to do something about that feeling. And that entire traveling system through your nerves isn't really physical. It's passing impulses, right? It's almost like electrical. Mm-hmm. So we think of energy kind of at that as that same thing, like electrical things. You feel it and it's just moving through you. So you have something like 72,000 nadis, right? 72,000 energy channels. And where they collect, where multiple nadis collect, there's a chakra. So there's more chakras than just the main ones, but the main ones go up the spine. And our nerves also go up the spine. So it's very interesting, the parallels that are run through this chakra system and our central nervous system. There's 7 or 8 main ones. I like to say 7, but the number will vary because there's a lot more chakras. There's chakras in your feet, there's chakras in your knees, like there's chakras all over. But the ones that people mainly focus on are the 7: the root, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the third eye, and the crown. Okay, so all of these things are when multiple energy channels connect. They form this spinning wheel of energy. So you can actually feel it in the way that when something buzzes, energy collects and that buzzing kind of happens. That's what I like to think of the interaction of a chakra, right? And it doesn't have to make sense to our mind because as we said before, our mind is bound to the finite. Our mind is limited, right? Our mind is a product of the brain, that's a product of the body, that is a product of, or is susceptible to time. It'll fade in time. Like our bodies aren't infinite. And yoga has this interesting idea that you are infinite, right? And the entirety of the practice is understanding how you are infinite. And the spoiler alert is kind of like the infinite is your connection to whatever you want to call it, divine, God, cosmos, universe. Like we all have a name, but it's ultimately nameless, right? So that thing that we are is larger than this individual self. So we cannot understand what we are with our mind because our mind is finite. So I like to say, just as water cannot rise above its own level, we cannot think ourselves to what is beyond the mind. So we can struggle all day trying to think about what chakras are, trying to think about like, what is energy? What are we? What is the divine? But ultimately, it's beyond the mind. So we can't understand it. We can just feel it. We can be an experience of it. And there's 2 different ways to try to go about something: to understand it conceptually or understand it experientially. Now, we cannot understand what we truly are in the system of yoga conceptually because our mind will hold us back, right? Our mind is finite and what we are is infinite. So we only can experience it, we only can understand it rather experientially. So when you feel these buzzings in your tailbone, in your hips, in your heart, in your throat, there's no need to make sense of it in your mind because your mind can't make sense of it. But you can just be in that feeling to understand like there's something there. And then maybe if you want to apply it to your human experience, to be like, okay, that was around my throat. What am I not saying? You know, or what did someone say to me that didn't land right with me? Or maybe I should try to see what happens because it's all experiential. See what happens if I say what I haven't been saying. If I tell that person what I'm really feeling, you know, let me just try it. And that is what yoga, how yoga becomes a science, because it's all hypothesis. I feel this in my third eye. Maybe there's some knowledge that I'm ready to understand. I feel this in my root, right? Root is all about, and I'll go through all of them if you want me to, but the root one is all about like like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like that need for shelter, food, friends, family, like all that. You feel something buzzing in your root and you're like, oh, I'm feeling a little ungrounded, right? That's where that term comes from. Well, let me check. Have I reached out to my family lately? Have my friends been kind of MIA? Should I reach out to them? Like, what's going to help me feel grounded in this human experience? And as you go higher up the chakras, it goes from human experience to like spiritual experience, right? So chakra 1 is like that root. It's getting you in the earth, quite literally, because we are earth, right? Everything we are is derived from materials that are found in the earth, minerals and elements and so on and so forth. Right? That second chakra is like your right to feel, and it's right around your hips, and it's right around your sexual organs, and it quite literally is that, right? That reproduction, right? Because as a human, or in our human experience, success of the human race is predicated upon reproduction, right? So it is that need to be fulfilled to feel successful in the human experience. Then we get up to that solar plexus chakra, which is right around your core, which you can think of as your power, right? So that's like who you are, your will to be authentically you. And then you get up to your heart, and your heart's like the bridge between the human and the spiritual, right? It's, I'd like to think, the most important, because without it, we can't cross from one to the other. And you'll find out that chakras isn't just a one-way stream up. A lot of people want to like ascend. You also got to come back down to earth. You also got to let it be a free flowing channel up and down. You can be in your spiritual self. You can be in your rooted, grounded self. You can be it all at the same time. The heart's the bridge for that, right? If that chakra is out of balance, you might not have that same free flowing of energy up and down. Then you get to your throat, and you start to get to your spiritual self, right? The subtle vibrations of sound, right? How you create sound, things like that. What are you saying? Because words are very subtle and they're very powerful. So how do you use those words? Then you get up to your third eye, and that's like your intuition, your knowledge, your wisdom. And you get up to your crown, and your crown's like you're merging with the infinite, right? You get that energy up to the crown. That's why everyone wants to go up, because then you can understand experientially who you are. You can kind of merge with the infinite in some sense. And I do a lot of trainings, and every time I do this stuff, I like to say anything is possible, right? And I think that we have such a rooted perception of if I experience it, then I'll believe it. When really, like, to believe that that could be possible, then you can open yourself up to have that experience. And that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, that shit was dope. I had to say that whole time.
I was like, wow.
God, that shit was dope. Well, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you resonate with that, because, you know, I think we sometimes, and we see it with yoga, we see it with the Hawaiian culture. So I'm Hawaiian by blood. You see people come into different lands and say, because that is not my way, that's a little barbaric, right? So we almost like bury these yogic practices, because when colonization happened in India, they're like, that is not the way that we do it. That must be weird. That must be barbaric.
Gotcha.
So we stepped away from those practices for what I like to think of as too long. And then West into the practice and starts to validate some of the things that now we allow it into our culture, right? Because now science has validated it. And that's beautiful, because science is very powerful and has a wonderful place. But the fact that we only believe it after it's been proven, I think just wastes some time, right? Like, you can go there, and if you go there, it doesn't matter if it's not someone else's way of getting there. If you get there, good for you, in a way. So the fact that we ever invalidate someone else's way of doing something, I think is detrimental to the collective enhancements of society, whatever term you want to use there.
Cool. Yeah. Just a quick heads up. We're going in and out a little bit with kind of your audio, but I think it's very important that the science part is really, really digging into this. So are you familiar with Heart Math Institute?
No.
So they kind of talk about the importance of the heart and how the heart has really a mind of its own. Whereas but yeah, let share some about that. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know exactly the quote, but I think they said if you're someone could be legally dead, like brain dead, but their heart still beats for, I think it's upwards of like 5 to 7 minutes after the person is proclaimed legally dead because of the brain damage. But if you look at like the different chakras, so one of the things I've seen is a lot of the first 3 chakras are the ones where people harbor most of their energy. So I'm not familiar exactly with those, the root, solar, and what's the third one? Gandhi. So we'll say the first 3. And so if you look at where the heart chakra is as the fourth one, that's the problem where we have the
sacral.
Energy. Okay, and the sacral. So we have the problems going
the sacral
down.
Yeah.
And so with the heart chakra not really getting as much of that energy flow up to it because most of our energy is stuck in the first 3, then the heart chakra doesn't work as well as it should. So then Heart Math Institute kind of went into it and said, so the heart beating is very important for HRV, so heart rate variability. And for those that are not as familiar with it, so having a higher HRV is actually better. So the more your heart is able to vary throughout the day, gives better for health. And I know things such as like Whoop or Ring or Aura Ring are using heart rate variability as a way to really determine someone's health. So whether someone's getting sick, whether they're too stressed, alcohol, all those types of things, I would say have a role in the heart not doing as well as it should. And I would imagine as much that probably ties into those lower energy centers. So we're so focused on either do I look good enough? So like the sexual type of things, like who am I sexually attracted to? The stress, I want to feel grounded because I don't know what the certainty is. So I'm wondering if that kind of has a role in the heart now doing as much as it should and playing into the heart rate variability not being as good. No, we're losing you a little bit, Kundi.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Mainly because.
Oh, I might need you to repeat
Hold
from
the
beginning.
Let me try revise my scene.
All right.
Yeah, so I love that question, Tyler. Like, does the fact that we spend so much time in the lower 3 affect the energy getting to our heart? And I would have to say like definitely, because we don't have unbound amounts of energy. Now we can always get more, but it's where we use our energy is where that energy will be spent. And so often we do spend times in the lower 3. So you're talking about where's my home? What is my means? Like, what am I wearing? Like all that is the root chakra. And sometimes we like spend all of our time there. Like, I got a nice home. Can I get a better car? Okay, I got a car. Can I get a second car? All right, can I upgrade my home? And we can spend our entire life in that first chakra, right? I got means now to have food. And a lot of times you'll see this with people that maybe didn't have as much growing up. Now they got some money and then they just spend it all on acquiring what they did not have earlier in life. Because to no fault of their own, now they can, right? Now they have the means to do so. So a lot of times we spend most of our time in that first chakra, right? Food, lodging, our car, what we're wearing, right? Then we get past that one, let's say, and when we say past, it's always free flowing, but where we spend the energy. So now we want to spend the energy in a higher one, then it's all about like sex and feeling and wanting pleasure, not just sexually, but all means of pleasure, right? Going to a professional sports event, like that's pleasurable. Going out, that's pleasurable, right? That's not your basic needs, but that's spending time in pleasure. So all of that is where those first 2 is kind of where most people are spending their energy. Then you get to that third one. That third one is kind of like, do you have enough willpower to be who you are authentically? And a lot of people don't get into that one. But when we do get into that one, we could get so addicted to that, to being strong, to power in this society, right? So those are our CEOs that then go on to be, you know, politicians, lawmakers, like all that. You get addicted to that power, and you say so much, you spend so much energy in that third chakra. So getting to that fourth chakra already has so many adversities. Like we got to be able to be content with what we have, so that we don't always spend money on material items. We got to be able to be satisfied with not just pleasure, but also pain. Like have that middle ground, like not just seek happiness, because if we always are just chasing happiness, we're always going to be chasing, like, because happiness is fleeting. So you'll find it. It might be with you for an hour, for a day, for a week, but it will fade. And then we're going to go chasing again. Right. So that's saying in the second chakra. Then that third chakra, you know, power. You start accumulating power. You become a leader in your community. Now what's next? What's next? More power, more power. If we can somehow get past those three, then we can use our heart to its full capacity. And our heart is literally what I like to think, the ability to surrender. Because you have to kind of surrender who you think you are in order to love others as they are. And we might have to like unpack that a little bit, but energetically,
yes. Please.
yeah, energetically, let's say first off, how to love yourself, right? Because you got to learn how to love yourself first. And more often than sometimes, I like to think most people don't truly love themselves. Now we got to stick with this thought a little bit, because who we think we are has to be, or who we know we are, who we are is only in this moment, right? And so much of our time is trying to be who we were, like a past version or something. We're like, I got to get back to that point, or who we could be in the future, right? So we're like, if I do this now, I will get to a point where I'll finally be enough and be ready to love myself then, right? But then doesn't exist in this moment. Like this is the only moment that exists. So if you want to love yourself, you have to meet yourself right here and know that this person that is right here is already enough, because there's no expectation that you have to be anything other than who you are right now, right? So the idea that we are not enough is based off of expectation. And that goes right back to the mind, and the mind is finite, right? The mind and the ego, they like to think that they're more than they are. So the ego says, I need to be this, I should be this, I could be doing this. And then it tricks us in saying, if you do this in this moment, you can one day be that point where you're enough. But the funny thing is that point where we think we're enough through the mind is always running ahead of us, right? So we get to that point, we're like, oh, if only I get my DPT, I'll be enough. I get my DPT and now there's a new goal. Can I get employed? You get employed, okay, you think you're gonna be enough, now there's a new goal. How many clients am I gonna have, right? So that point where we think we're gonna be enough is always running ahead of us. So this idea to use this moment to get to where we're going to be enough is a fallacy. To use this moment to truly understand who you are right here and right now is the practice of yoga. Like that is yoga, to just drop into the present moment and say, this is me. And there's no expectation that you should be anything other than who you are, because those expectations are products of the mind. They're products of seeing who other people are and basing your life off of that, or they're products of seeing who you could be and trying to get to that point. And the crazy thing is that when you let go of those expectations, right? When you allow yourself to stop searching for who you think you could be, you realize that who you are is perfect. Because perfection by definition means a space where there is no lack. And the only thing you could ever lack in this moment is who you think you could be in this moment. That's all you could ever lack in this moment. If you stop thinking you could be,
I was like, man, what?
Damn. Okay.
Okay.
But if you stop thinking that you could be anyone else in this moment than who you are, you're perfect. And the way that I like to think of it is that you have never existed before and you will never exist again. So what archetype is there to tell you how to exist? There's no model out there you can follow. Like This is Pat, Tyler, Travis, like we are the first time, one of one. There's zero.
That's what I was thinking, one of one.
Exactly. There is zero model that we can follow to try to tell us how to live our life. We just got to go out there and live it, knowing that we are unique and knowing that you're perfect, you know, like in this moment.
Right.
So you drop into this moment and you realize you're perfect. Now you can love yourself. Everything else is just loving who you've been or who you could be. And so many people never want to actually drop into this moment, because this moment isn't just happiness, pleasure. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Like to sit in the sadness of this moment sometimes is the hardest thing to do. So I like to think that strength is not your ability to build yourself into some version that you could be. Strength is your ability to be who you are. Because only the strongest people will allow themselves to actually be who they are in this moment. Right? Anyone can run away from this moment and be like, nah, that person that I'm finding here, I'm uncomfortable with them. I'm going to run to my future self. Sit with this self, because it's only when you sit with this self that you can love this self. And it's only when you love yourself that you get into the heart chakra, that you know how to love others, not as who they could be, but who they are. Like straight up, to love other people as they are, that's the practice of yoga, right? Because sometimes we get into relationships, we're like, okay, I like this part of this person, but then when they do this, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. It irks me a little bit. But if you love them as they are, the whole thing in their totality, that's how we kind of get to the heart chakra. And then we realize, yeah, you know, like that little thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way, I kind of do a little bit of that too. And you start seeing all of those other pieces of people that you formerly ran away from, that you start loving, you start seeing them in yourself. You're like, man, that thing that Tyler did in college, that kind of was like, you know, no specific instance, but you start seeing that in yourself. You're like, oh, I kind of do a little bit of that in my own way. And that's how we move from the individual self to the collective, right? That's the lower three chakras to the upper three. Individual self, universal self. And that heart is a bridge, because you got to learn how to love yourself and then love others as yourself. And then you start to like kind of expand, right? And we are unique. We all have our own little concoction of who we are characteristically, but we all do have the same characteristics, just in different capacities, right? So starting to see all that, starting to see like that unison, that's how the heart chakra can maybe become wiser, to use your term, Tyler, and like it having a brain, like to become more understanding of other people. And that's, you know, the way to love people is just understand them, not as you hope that they be, just as they are. And this one teacher, his name is Ram Dass. I don't know if you're familiar, but Ram Dass has a quote that says, you know, when you go out into the forest, and I'm paraphrasing, but when you go out into the forest, you see the trees and you notice how they're all beautiful. You don't see one tree and think that it's more beautiful than another per se. But when we come back into human society, we lose all of that sight, and we stop seeing every single tree of a human as beautiful. We start saying, oh, the way that that person bends kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't like the way that that person grew. And the thing is, just like trees, we are a product of our experience. You know, we are only at this point operating out of what we've been through, because what we've been through has led us to this perception to go about this moment in this way, right? Just like trees, how light hits them and they bend a different way. And we never say that that tree bends that way and that's weird. We just see the tree for what it is, as beautiful. And if we start doing that with humans, we'll learn how to love humans a little bit more. Like the only reason that person did that, you know, one day I was biking to work, and I like to bike sometimes, and my bike got stolen. And it was right after yoga class, and I taught that yoga class, and I was thinking, oh, I was like, right, lower three chakras, very upset. You know, like, man, that was my ride home. That's my transportation. I don't have a car yet. This is just when I moved back to Hawaii, Tyler. So I didn't buy a car yet. And I'm like, that was my ride. And I thought, oh, let me like try to practice some of these yogic thoughts. And I thought, you know, the only reason that person stole that bicycle is because of what they've been through has led them to that decision. And you cannot fault that decision, just as you cannot fault a tree for bending a certain way. Like, it's just what they've been through that made them bend that way, that made them steal that bike. And that is just the universe at play. And when you start seeing it like that, you become that larger experience. You become that universal self. And it's like, that's not someone stealing a bike from me because it was never mine, because who am I? The ego? Like that's limited, right? And we're limitless. I'm not the ego. Like, that's not my bike. But we you know, we have a funny way of messing it up with our little monies and all that. Like we think that it's ours, you know, but it's not, you know, it's not really ours. Right. And I think that that's why every yoga practice, I'm sure if both of you have been to some, hopefully they end in that pose Shavasana.
Yeah.
Right. It's that pose of death. It's quite literally called corpse pose. It's a practice of letting go of everything that is bound to this life. So if I had hung on to that bike for however many more years I have left, eventually when I ultimately do meet my death, that bike isn't coming with me. So it just left me earlier than that. But that's the practice of Shavasana, right?
Yeah.
The practice of Shavasana is let go of everything you identify with in this life as this individual to become part of the larger, part of the universal. And that's kind of what I like about that practice. So now, Tyler, you're talking right back to the brain of your heart, right? Emotional intelligence, things like that. Like, can that actually create physical well-being? And I think that the answer is yes, because when you see yourself as more than just this individual body, you start taking care of everything, man, not just your body. You start taking care of your friends, you start taking care of your mentals, you start taking care of the environment in little ways and stuff like that. And ultimately that is health, because I like to think of health, you know, you talk about your heart as being intelligent. Health is a space that you operate from. It's not a space that you find, right? You cannot find health in some way. You hold a space for health to happen. And how you hold that space is different. You know, you go to the physical therapy sessions, you're holding space for health to happen. You don't got to do anything, because what we said earlier, like you cannot do something to say, once I do this, then I'll be enough. Let health be right here and then expand into it. Like hold that space of health, do those practices that cultivate or within that space. And you'll see that you'll start loving yourself. You'll start loving others. You'll start living a life that is conducive to that heart space, and ultimately living a life that's conducive to more life, for lack of a better term, a longer life, a healthier life.
You said something earlier I want to just bring back, just kind of my mind always goes to physical therapy, because that's
what we do.
that's what I spend most of my time doing. But this idea of, first I want to just say that in my practice that people's expectations of rehab and where they're supposed to be is in the future. I was like, I want to be, so this is where I used to be at. I hurt my shoulder. Now I want to be here. And so they forget the small victories. I was like, oh yeah, I can move my shoulder without pain now, but I still can't play volleyball, for example. I was like, but that's, and then going to put in the mindset, like that's no small feat. Like you are progressing, though you feel like you're not where you're supposed to be. In this moment, you are where you're right where you're supposed to be. Kind of like that's just part of the process. It's just like, and accepting that. So I like to say, you got to be aware of the small victories that you're having, and that mindset is like, though you have this expectation of where you should be at, but you being here right now and the way that you're feeling is way better than where you're at last time, and now it's just part of the progress. So I think a lot of that, what you were saying is like we have these expectations of this is what it should look like, but every healing is not linear, it goes up and down. So it's like you just have to be present in that moment, be present in the moment, and just be aware of where you're at.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's very like crosses over with yoga mindset wise. Like you offering that perspective is so important, because what people cling to, that past version of themselves before they got hurt, or who they hope to be. If you're like training young athletes from a physical therapy standpoint, like, and they want more mobility to do this or that, you know, whatever it is, the root of human suffering is trying to make the unreal real. Like that past version of themselves that's in the past, like that past would be called unreal. Like it's not real, because the only thing that's real is in this moment. So you bring them back to the realness and you say, yeah, but look at all the mobility you do have in your shoulder. It's not about what you had, because that person's not real. That person died the moment after you left that person, right? Like that's just a figment of your imagination, trying to remember who that person was. And our mind just plays all these tricks, right? So it's like, I'm sure they're coming to you and they're thinking, oh, I used to have more mobility. And truth be told, like you get them to like 90% of where they think they are, that's probably 100%. They're just imagining themselves with more mobility before sometimes. You know, if you're right there towards the full range of motion in something like a shoulder, you know, and they're like, oh, but I had more mobility, that could just be a figment of their imagination, like just running away with them thinking that they had more in the past. So it's just unreal. Like our mind will play those tricks. So to bring your patients back to like what is real, like look at this mobility that you do have, right? And this is incredible. And this is like straight up, like it's a miracle that we can even do half the things a human body does, right? And if we're, comfort of life and all that, have a little bit less mobility in our shoulders or in our hips and our knees, it's uncomfortable, but we're still so blessed, you know, in a lot of our functionality. Bringing your patients back to what is real, I like to think of, that's a huge practice for them, you know. And you know, in yoga, we never say things like I'm saying on this podcast, because you got to be gentle with it. You can't just like tell people, you start coming into a class and saying, you know, you're actually infinite. You know, people are kind of walk out, they roll up the mat and be like, what is this person talking about? You know? So same thing with your patients. Like you can't just say like that person that you're remembering, that's not real. You just say, look at what is real. Look at this person, look at this mobility. And I'm proud of you. You know, like you can play all sides of that and be like, yeah, I remember when you were not as mobile, and look at you now. Like that's amazing. And just reminding people of that, I think, is important. Like that's why almost every class I remind people of the past and future. It's like, yeah, you want to get to this point, you're going to miss where you are, right? And so much of what we spend, if we spend this moment trying to get to another moment, we're never going to be in this moment. We're always going to be trying to get to that other moment, and therefore missing life as it is, missing ourselves as we are, and then missing everything else that's happening, all the feeling. And feeling, like you said, like you want to feel good. Feeling is just meant to be felt. Good, bad, who knows? Like bad feelings, sad feelings, like it's meant to be felt in that moment. It doesn't mean it has to stay with you forever, because it is fleeting. So physically, you feel bad. Okay, let's do something in this moment to try to get some of that feeling to move through you. But it's not wrong that you're having that feeling. Like that feeling is meant for you in this moment, because it's telling you that your shoulder wants to get back to homeostasis. So let's get it back right here in this moment, in this present. But the fact that you're feeling bad is not wrong, right? It's not something to like run from. It's not something to rush the process and go for instant gratification, be like, I just want to feel happy all the time. That's what's going to bring about suffering, right? Our wants to feel happy all the time will make us suffer more than an injury could ever. Right? And really what we suffer when we suffer injuries is we suffer who we thought we were.
Yeah, and I see that firsthand, because people get injured and the first thing they either say to themselves or someone tells them is like, you should stop doing that, which is not always the case, because it's they feel that they can't play a specific sport if they can't do a particular motion. But there's modifications, there's different ways that you can still experience life and experience the things that you enjoy. You just have to change it just a little bit. So create modifications, and still it doesn't have to be this exact picture in your mind of doing it, is which a lot of people are hyper focused on. It's like you can bring it back, and like there's a infinite amount of possibilities that can happen, or there's different ways to get these emotions, these feelings with just being active, or in this rehab standpoint. So
a story that I tell my you know, because from a yoga side, you know, people are like, I want to do a handstand and stuff like that. And sometimes there's like, you know, the chromium process and the humerus that just make a bony constraint and actually can't get your hand to extend directly up to do a handstand. So you just got to go around that and take a wider handstand so it looks different. You know what I mean? Like, but you're working with your anatomy. So if you can't totally lift your arm directly over your head, you just got to lift it a little bit wider and then try handstand with a wider set. So what I tell my students, and what could probably be beneficial for your patients, is like this little story I came across about ballet dancers in Russia. Okay. And at a young age, these dancers were x-rayed right around after puberty and seeing where their bones lie, probably around 11, 12, 13, they were x-rayed at the femur insertion to the ilium. And the doctors advised the coaches whether that person would ever have enough mobility, right? Getting that femur away from the ilium, any amount to make that circumduction, anything that you need from that hip point of view, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction. Will they have enough mobility to do some of the moves that are going to be required of them later? And if not, they cut them right on the site. And they account for physical therapy. They account for the space that you can get into it. But sometimes you look at a femur and how the femoral head is, and it's just not going to happen. Like at some point, that femur is going to hit the bone of the ilium and not allow for enough external rotation, let's say, to get into a ballet move. And I tell this to people and I let them have their reaction. And a lot of times the reaction is like, oh, that's so sad. You know, like these 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they've been dancing for 8 years, their entire life. And just like that, they're cut for no fault of their own, just the way that their body was made. And I resonate with that. I'm like, yeah, that is sad, but that's also liberating, because they're not going to try to get into a move for the next 10 to 15 years that their body just can never get into through no fault of their own. It's liberating to be like, this is your body. In these next 10, 15 years, go find a passion, another passion that you can do, rather than struggling to make this passion become your suffering, right? Because if this stays your passion and you're trying to do moves that other people do, but you cannot because of your body, it will become a point of suffering for you. So go out there, you're liberated from this. You're liberated from trying to find or trying to be who you think you should be, even though you cannot be that because of your anatomy. Go find a passion that will serve you. So I like to think of that as a liberating process, to understand your body and to be like, my whole thing was I did have a lot of shoulder issues, and I haven't really played volleyball since I stopped. And volleyball was a passion of mine, but look at me now, like I'm passionate about yoga, like I'm passionate about surfing, I'm passionate about other things that I do in life. And the time that I spent away from volleyball allowed for those passions to come through, right? If I were to try to stick with volleyball, and volleyball has a very low ceiling for professional, like you don't really go play professional, you play at like the men's circuit and semi-competitive kind of a thing. I would have been chasing like what I thought with a hurt shoulder and all of that stuff, or I could find a different passion and be just as happy. Who's to say, right? Who's to say? But I feel fulfilled in the current state because I spent, what is it now, 6 years not doing volleyball when I had previously done volleyball my whole life, right? So it's that time away, your body freeing you into what you can do, that you can find other passions, and it's not the end of the world. But if I had tried to stick with volleyball through my hurt shoulder and didn't get to where I think I should be, I would have suffered. I'd have been like, man, I didn't make pro or whatever. I don't know what, a dream would be. But the same thing with the ballet dancers, man, I'm not making the best company because I can't do that move. That becomes their suffering. Mm-hmm. But they could never do that move because their bones were just made different, just different size bones. So when your passion, if you allow your body to liberate you to find a different passion, you will prevent your former passion from becoming your suffering. And that's what I like to tell my people. Like, if you can't do a handstand like this, let go of the passion of trying to do a handstand like that. Just take it a little bit wider. Work with your body, not against it. And yeah, you're never gonna look like the Instagram yoga handstands. Like, it's not gonna look perfect, but you're gonna be able to do it. And what do you do it for? Do you do it because it's a passion? Do you do it because you want to post on Instagram? Like, you start to work through all these mind models, and you kind of get to the root of why. Why do you want more mobility in your shoulder? Is it because you want to go have fun playing volleyball? Well, okay, that makes sense. What else what else brings you fun? What else is fun for you? You know, like all those things. Like in the meantime, yeah, you lose something, but you can gain so much more if you just allow yourself to stay open to what is coming your way. In some
Dropping
ways.
so many gems.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I think, yeah, you touched on some really good points, because I was thinking also while you were telling the story, just even you and yourself, how you talked about the front squats. For you, you're like, hey, my body just couldn't do that. And although that might have been like you saw as like a failure when you first started, it maybe kind of opened the light to say, hey, something else can help me to get to where I want to. Maybe volleyball right now is a segue for me to meet whoever I needed to, or have certain experiences to be like, all right, I may be in, and like our patients now, it's like, all right, you may be in chronic pain, but that might be the thing that turns you to like a yoga or some type of strength training that you now open up your eyes to, and are like, okay, this is a passion of mine that I can now fulfill. And one of the things that's pretty interesting that I notice with golfers a lot of the time is they take some studies and they look at golfers, and they're like, a lot of golf instructors will say, put up a picture of Tiger Woods or something of his swing and say, this is what the perfect swing looks like. But a lot of people's bodies, they'd have to get surgery in order to get them into that point, or it takes like months and months of practice. So it's like a lot of cool things is even understanding your own body and saying, hey, it may not look like the Tiger Woods swing, but I'm doing what's best for my body, and how can I make it the most efficient it can be. So I was like, I think that's a good thing that you kind of highlight, and also just us in general, of like, even if we think of a squat, everyone thinks of like the ass to grass for squats. Is like some people's bodies, whether it's the femur or whatever it may be, can't allow them to do that. So once we kind of get rid of that mindset, like this is the idea perfect model, and understanding how do you control your body, how do you feel your body, it was like, I think that's more of something that we need to get better at. And also one of my things is I hate the topic of pain, because it's so subjective, and it's so it's on people's minds. Whereas say you may have given them more range of motion and they're able to do other things easier, but then they're like, oh, okay, but I still have this exact same pain that I came into you with. Whereas you highlighted pretty good. It was like, all right, I went to yoga class and maybe I couldn't finish the whole class, but this time was 20 minutes. The next time is 25 minutes. So it's like seeing that progress, I think, is pretty good. And even just for us, I know myself, I have to get a lot better at like, okay, what are you most limited in today? And what is your goal for this week? Because I know what your end goal is. It's like, and if I keep saying, okay, how's your pain today? Or how are you doing today in terms of functioning? It's like, I'm kind of doing them a disservice, because I'm still making them look for that. Okay, well, I came into you because I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z without any pain. And it was like, for me, it can get frustrating, because it's like, I see you getting better, you getting stronger, you're doing those things. But for me, I need to be able to vocalize that to you and help you to understand that. So like, do you have any tips that you've seen in your classes where it's like, for your students, where they're going through, it's like, hey, yeah, I feel like I can't get through a whole class. How do you kind of highlight their progress?
Well, I mean, the one thing about like liberating like your body, like how you said Tiger Woods perfect swing and all that, you'll see this in downward facing dog, and it's a pretty common one, right? We kind of all know what like a downward facing dog looks like. You'll see a lot of people ask like, but how do I get my heels to the ground? And from a physical therapy standpoint, you can kind of relate to them like, okay, let's talk about what's actually happening to get your heels to your ground. And sometimes, yes, you can get more dorsiflexion in your ankles to some point, but there is an end range of motion. If there weren't an end range of motion, you know, our metatarsals would be on our tibia, right? If there wasn't an end range of motion, it would get all the way up there to your shin bone. So there is an end range of motion. So you can play with the amount of mobility that you can find in the ankle. But at some point, every individual, and you probably see this in your practice and your clients, have some type of end range of motion, barring surgery, like you said, Tyler. And maybe their end range of motion is to a point where it will prevent their heels to get on the ground, right? Because that's pretty heavy dorsiflexion in the ankles to get your heels to your ground. And then, yeah, maybe you could play with the calves and different muscular space that could maybe get the heels to the ground. But if it is actual joints inhibiting the heels to get to the ground, it shouldn't be chased after. Like, it should be worked with. So kind of saying your downward facing dog is never going to have your heels in your ground, and that's okay. Like, that's the first thing. And I would never say like that, because you never speak in definitives, right? You never say never, but you say perhaps your dorsiflexion is not as the mobility of your dorsiflexion isn't as large as other people's range of motion. And therefore your heels may never get to the ground, and that's okay, right? But maybe here are some things you could do. So you give some yoga stretches, sitting on into plantar flexion, to dorsiflexion, just playing with that. You recommend PT, you do all that, but you still let them know that at the end of all this, it is possible that your heels won't get to the ground for no fault of your own, just because your end range of motion of your dorsiflexion doesn't allow for it, right? And that is the first step, to kind of say, like, this mind model that you have of what a downward facing dog looks like, it doesn't exist. Because just as you only exist in this moment, every time you take a downward facing dog, it is the only time that posture ever exists. So we say downward facing dog, or we say things like full splits. In Sanskrit, it's Hanumanasana. So you say that pose and people immediately have an image in their mind, right? You say full splits, you immediately think of that leg spread, hips all the way flush to the ground, tall spine, all that stuff. And you think, I can't do that. But once you find your full splits, you'll realize that that mind model was just a perception of what people have done in the past or what you hope you can do in the future. But where you are is where the pose is. And I like to say, never find the pose, let the pose find you, right? So go into what you think of a downward facing dog, listen to the anatomical cues, but once you get there, arrive here and let the pose find you here. Like wherever you are, that's a downward facing dog. If today that means on your knees, that's a downward facing dog. Like we think of these poses as rigid, but really they're very fluid. Like that's straight up what I would say to someone like Tyler, like if I'm in child's pose because I need to catch a breath and the rest of the class is in that full splits, Hanumanasana, and the teacher says, where you are right now is your full splits for today, that's a liberating statement. Because I'm in the child's pose and I'm thinking, this is my full splits today, because I can rename poses because I don't have those mind models of what the pose should be, right? So it's only when we keep taking that mind model of like, this is a full splits, that inhibits our ability to do the whole class. But once you're in child's pose and the rest of the class is doing anything else anatomically, and the teacher says, let's make up a pose. This is plant pose. Boom, it becomes plant pose. Wherever you are, that becomes plant pose. So that's the cool thing about yoga. We have these ideas of what a downward facing dog is and what a full splits is, and heels to the ground and legs long, open hamstrings, open hip flexors, pelvis flush to the earth. But when you get to where you are and you say, this is the pose, it's liberating. So like right where we are, we can name this Warrior 2, because Warrior 2 as it exists now has never existed before, right? And it will never exist again, right? It's that whole idea of past and future, right? So Warrior 2 is whatever we decide to make it in this moment. And yoga, like all the way back to its roots, how physical yoga was created is people were meditating in caves and in cross-legged positions or whatever. And as you can imagine, sitting for hours, you kind of would be like, oh, my low back needs something. I don't know what, but it's buzzing. So they got up and they did literally anything to alleviate that pressure on their low back. So if you think about what they did, like it's like our morning stretches. Like we are not trying to look beautiful. We're not trying to go into a Warrior 2 and like stick the landing. We're just like trying to do anything to get some of that spinal fluidity. Tyler, I saw like that awesome spine mobility one that you did on Instagram a little bit ago, to get all 7, movements of the spine and all that. It just looked beautiful. Without all that, beauty, that's what yogis were doing. They're just like doing anything to just maybe get some more fluid into their spine, whatever it was. Gravity played on their spine too long and it just made it a little bit more compressed. Whatever it was, it wasn't beautiful. And over time, we made them, okay, now this is the pose. This is a Warrior 2. This is a down dog. But if you think about the roots are to alleviate sensation, to let feeling move through you, and then to just be present. Because yoga physically was a way to sit longer in meditation. So it's really just to meditate. And meditate just means to hold space, to be present in this moment, to concentrate on this present moment. How you do that, infinite opportunities to meditate. Like we can meditate right now, just like by being so present in this conversation, that is meditation. And it's not saying that you have to like sit for hours to find, but it is when you sit for hours in it, you find more. Like that's how they discover the chakras, as we talked about earlier. Like more things come to you. That's cool. But meditation at its simplest form is just being present, concentrating on this moment. So saying that this moment is the pose, that's how I get through class. Like when I started realizing that when I dropped to child's pose, I don't have to call it child's pose. And when the teacher says do this pose, I can relabel this pose as what they just said, and I'm in it. Liberating, freedom. Ram Dass also said, like, or someone that I listened to on a podcast, I think postmortem, I think they're past, said, what do you mean you want to be happy? Like, what is happiness? Happiness is a feeling that we label a sensation, right? So sensation, ultimately, we're having sensations right now. And what we label them through our mind becomes what we feel them as. So you want to be happy, label more sensations as happiness. That's how you'll be more happy. Like you feeling the sensation of like sadness, call that happiness. And you're gonna find you're gonna be more happy because that's what you wanna be, right? So what do we really wanna be? We want to be in a mind space where we feel happy. We'll make that mind space interpret more sensations as happy, and you will be more happy. That's the same thing with yoga. That's the same thing how I started to make it through class. It's like late.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn, you might have to take a bow at the end of this. Damn.
Right. Wow.
No, but I mean that's the root of it. You know, like just you want to label the perfect swing for all your golfers. Take a swing, call that perfect. Start there. You know, start there versus trying to chase for Tiger Woods' perfect swing, and then see where that can take you.
Wow. I really appreciate you for being on because like I'm just taking this all in. Yeah. I was like, wow.
Yeah, I'm like, I kind of just want you to talk the whole time. I was like, I'll shut up.
Right. I was like, I had questions. I was like, wow, but like he's just dropping so much information. Yeah. I'm taking it all in. It's like it's resonating with me. So I was like, let me just rock. So
my question for you though, because we talked a lot about the mental aspect and not as much on the breath work, but I kind of want you to go into a little bit about the breath work as well as the strength that's required to do yoga. Because for me, originally, I thought yoga was like, oh, it's a bunch of people that are like really flexible. And then it wasn't until I started working as a physical therapist where I understood the difference of flexibility versus mobility. And when I realized that yoga wasn't as much passive, it's a very active thing, whether it's an active breath, whether it's holding a position is very active. So if you can go a bit on to the strength and power that's required for yoga and maybe a little bit about the breath work too.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'd love to start there because so I do a lot of trainings, right? And I like to say that flexibility is a term that I kind of stray away from because it could be a little misleading. Now, when we talk about mobility versus stability, there's a happy medium. To be mobile and stable is health physically. Why I alluded to the training is that when we're training people, you know that forward fold when you're kind of like standing on your feet and your body is folding over your thighs, that one. New teachers will see someone that is very stable, that is very strong, that isn't as flexible as like hanging out like halfway. Like they kind of like started to fold down, but they couldn't get all the way down. So they're like kind of just hunched over. And a lot of times this could be, I don't like to, stereotype, but this could be like males trying it for the first time, and maybe active males that do a lot of weightlifting, that have very strong legs, not very flexible legs. So like can't even touch their toes, right? That idea, like I can't touch my toes, I can't do yoga, which is false. But let's say they can't touch their toes. So they're kind of like hanging out. New teachers would like try to do everything to help them. And then there's a person next to them that is like all the way chest to thighs and like reaching for more ground behind them and trying to pull themselves more into their legs. And we talk about flexibility and mobility, or stability and mobility, and which one should you talk to first? Because which one is closer to injuring themselves? It is not the one that is hyper stable, because that person, if that is like a newcomer to yoga and very active, strong person, they could probably stay there for ages. They're fine right there. It's the person that's at the end of their mobility and searching for more that might hurt themselves quicker. So to be too flexible isn't always great for joints. Physical therapists, I manage a studio. We have 2 locations. We have 5 physical therapists on staff, and they also are yoga teachers. So they have this great way of crossing the two, physical therapy and yoga. And they talk about, because I was in training, I was training 4 of them this past round. And I was like, I don't really like the term flexibility, flexing, because, when you talk about flexing, you kind of talk about concentric contraction, but there's also the eccentric contraction, like all that stuff. Like flexing is kind of a weird term. So we were like brainstorming how to get around flexing, like flexibility and flexing. Like it's just a little bit misleading in all of the ways that we use it in yoga. And they say, in physical therapy, they like to use, are we trying to make your muscles longer or shorter today? Like, are we working for muscle length or taking some length away to be more stable? And that's how I like to think about the flexibility one, Tyler, is like, the person that is, their hamstrings are super, super long already, they might need to work on more stability, because if those hamstrings are perhaps too long, and those tendons get loose around the hips, and now they got their quadriceps are long as well. You got their IT bands, their piriformis, their iliopsoas, like all that is just all super long. Now the tendons that kind of attach to the bones around the hip might not be as stable, and that hip might slide out of place a little bit easier. So it's not always just about the length of the muscles. It's also about the strength of the muscles. So yoga offers you a time to be in your pose at, let's say, the length of the muscle, and strengthen at the length. So strengthen long, not just short, not just concentrically contract to strengthen. I don't want to say even eccentrically contract, because you're already holding. So it's like an isometric contraction of a long muscle while you're also strengthening, right? So that idea, like that isometrically contracted long muscle, will help make that a stable and mobile muscle, not just mobile, not just stable. Because you make a mobile muscle, you will concentrically contract, and that muscle will get stable muscle. You concentrically contract a lot, that muscle will kind of stabilize that joint. If you're very strong in that muscle, you want to get mobility in that joint, you can definitely stretch that muscle out. But now if you stretch it out and also strengthen at the length of the muscle, that's what a lot of yoga asanas do, is they try to bring you to your mobile point of your muscle and also strengthen there, not just to strengthen at the concentrically contracted point of your muscle, and not just to stretch out the muscle with no consideration to stability. So I hope that kind of touched on that part of the question a little bit. But a lot of yoga postures are designed with that in mind, I suppose. Like when you talk about the physical posture, they're trying to get you to that point where you have a long muscle, but you also need to stabilize. So you need to isometrically contract that muscle. And as you contract that muscle starts to throw down more muscle. And the beauty of that, the symbiotic relationship between muscle and bone, the muscle tugs on the bone to drop that calcium. In turn, the stress on the bone wants the bone to throw down more bone matter. So then you create more bone density to hold more calcium and all the things that are needed for contraction. And stronger bones and stronger muscles together create physical health in some way. So now the breath part of that, I like to go right into the breath from that, because yoga a lot of times could be thought of as a workout. Now, when we're talking about workout, we're talking about ATP to get those muscles to do what they need to do. Anaerobic versus aerobic respiration, right? Yoga uses aerobic respiration as much as possible, because through aerobic respiration, when you have the oxygen, you can go through, I think, the Krebs cycle and the help me out with the term, electromagnetic chain or something like
undergrad. That's long.
You know what I mean? There's like those last 2 that end up popping out like 34 extra ATP molecules of ATP. Now ATP are the elemental building blocks of making muscles do things, contract and stuff like that. And all of that put together, when you get into anaerobic, when you breathe oxygen, anaerobic with oxygen, basically the cycles or the processes that happen with oxygen allow for 34 extra ATP on top of what is would be in the anaerobic respiration process. So the anaerobic respiration process, when you no longer have oxygen moving through your respiration process, you're generating 4 ATP. All right, so you can do things, but you're going to be able to do less before you get tired. And that's what puts you into child's pose, right? Because your breath all of a sudden has failed you in a way that you're not used to breathing for a efficient amount of time effectively. Now you're in anaerobic process. No matter how strong you are, you got 5-pound weights. At some point, your ATP is not going to be enough to have you do that exercise. You're going to drop those weights. So you talk about these 50-year-old women, Tyler, like they have trained their bodies to stay in aerobic respiration for longer. So it's not necessarily that they're stronger. They just got 38 ATP trying to do the same thing that your 4 are doing when your breath has given up on you, or your breath isn't still with you. So you just kicked yourself into anaerobic, and a lot of people fixate on like anaerobic processes and like getting better in the anaerobic, but really yoga is all about staying in the aerobic respiration for as long as you can. And if you ever read that book Breath by James Nestor, I'll recommend that to everyone. It's talking about when people retrain their breath, they have been tested to go longer on stationary bikes by staying in aerobic respiration for longer. Because when we kick ourselves into anaerobic, it doesn't matter how much muscle we have, the ATP, the energy that is trying to fuel that muscle to work isn't going to be there for us. Even if we have all this physical mass in the world, 5-pound weights is going to feel like 50, and we're going to start to drop them, right? So when you combine breath into yoga, you're allowing your body to stay in the work for longer. Now, to stay in the work of yoga asana, of that physical yoga, is to lengthen and strengthen your muscles at the same time. So you want to be able to stay in that for a bit longer. You got to breathe into that. Now, breath, we can go into that for a whole episode, I feel like, because breath is amazing in its capacity to release everything. 80% of, let's say fat, 80% of fat is released through breath. Now, it's not burned just through breathing, but it is released through the breath in the form of carbon dioxide. So when those fat cells break down, it is released through water and then through breath, carbon dioxide, and all of that put together. I think the study was 8 out of every 10 pounds or something like that is released through breath. So you talk about breath as a form of releasing, and then we talk about our society as being body conscious. Like they want to do what's good for their body. You start telling them you can release more through your body than you can through your breath than you can through your sweat. They're gonna be like, and why am I doing all this? why am I hopping for a run at 6 a.m.? Why don't I just sit down and breathe? Right. Kind of a fallacy, because the run will burn the fat, let's say, that the breath then releases. But the breath is still required to release that. 80% of that rather gets released through your breath. So there's a middle ground. That breath is needed, but when you go through breathing practices, just breathing, you are still just releasing. So all of that you start to release, and you learn to understand your human experience in a more energetic way, because breath is subtle. Breath isn't something that like we see. It's not like, 2 days ago I wasn't as far into my full split, so now I'm further. You see that progress. You don't really see that with breath. But when you feel it, when you feel that progress, it has huge implications over your life. And one of the things that I recently have been working with is this idea that we need less breath than we think we do. And it came from that book, Breath by James Nestor. And the perfect breath was 5.5 liters of air, where you inhale for 5.5 seconds, exhale for 5.5 seconds. That will be 5.5 breaths per minute. So it's like that 5.5, and it counts for everything. But we are constantly like taking in more oxygen than we need. So 5.5 liters, like the adult human lung capacity with one breath would be like 6 liters of air. Like one full breath in a minute would allow for 6 liters of air into your lungs for healthy lungs, and all things considered. average. Now, if you think you only need 5.5 per minute, your breaths are not as deep as you think that they need to be. And the reason is because we often think that oxygen is like what our body needs, and we got to get out that carbon dioxide. But the actual way that oxygen gets to where it needs to go is by using carbon dioxide to get there. So your blood moves through your body, it picks up carbon dioxide, and as it comes into your lungs, it's like I like to think of it as a ticket on a ride or something that you have to hand off for your oxygen partner to get on to that blood cell. So that carbon dioxide physically has to come off and say, hey, I was occupying a seat, go occupy that seat, and then go to where you need to be to heal, right? To get more oxygen, to get more blood into our shoulder to heal it. But if we only breathe, if we only have oxygen and we're over oxygenated, we're hyperventilated, there's no carbon dioxide to be a passenger on that blood cell to say, hey, come have my seat. So our oxygen doesn't actually go anywhere. It just sits and it doesn't get dispersed to do aerobic respiration. So we actually need carbon dioxide just as much as we need oxygen. We actually need the homeostasis of it. We need a one-to-one exchange. We need just as much carbon dioxide as oxygen so that they can just create this process of in and out, one-to-one, and in a beautiful relationship. That is how you physically find health through breath. You allow that breath to actually come in, and that oxygen that comes in through that air to go to where it needs to go by having enough carbon dioxide. How you have enough carbon dioxide, you don't breathe as much, right? Because if we go and we start to hyperventilate, all we're getting is oxygen. We're not letting that carbon dioxide levels rise. So you talk about like VO2 max and like all those things that they measure. We do need carbon dioxide to allow the oxygen to do the process it needs to do. Right? So carbon dioxide often is like vilify, like that's toxin. We got to get that out. We need it to do the process of oxygenation. And that's the homeostasis that yoga is all about. It's all about finding homeostasis of your body in space, of your breath between carbon dioxide, of your molecules. That you can take it to any level. And it's about finding the middle ground between opposites, or rather where opposites come together and become one, which is what yoga is, unison, right? So where carbon dioxide and oxygen come together, that is yoga, right? Where they're one-to-one, they're both present, that's yoga. So when you talk about stability and mobility, when it comes together, that's yoga. Not just mobility, not just stability, right there. All of those things. You can break it down on every level. Yoga is where the opposites meet. And that's the beauty of it.
Right.
The yin and the yang coming together.
Yeah.
I appreciate
absolutely.
you, Travis, for coming on. It's like so much information.
So we're gonna have to have another episode on that breath work, honestly.
Right. I'm excited. We have to get you back on for that.
I'm more than down. I appreciate both of you for giving me the chance, the opportunity, and it was fun.
Yeah. So thank you again for taking the time and just kind of like speaking to everyone and showing your knowledge, because that showed me a lot, even just how to even speak to people and how to look at the situations that come into my own life. So thank you again, just for joining us and just sharing some knowledge.
If anyone has questions, where can they find you? Just kind of email or social medias.
Yeah, I got social media. Travis Cundiff, TravisKaeo, all one word. And then I got like the studio that I work for. I have an email, travis@yogaunderthepalms.com. So if you ever want to like practice or if you're in Hawaii, I've been trying to get Tyler out to Hawaii for a while. He knows I've been trying to get him out. Yoga Under the Palms is a studio I work at. So it's called Yoga Under the Palms. We're in Kailua, Kaimuki on the island of Oahu. And I just thank you both so much, because I think that what you're doing by trying to get this information out, not just yoga, physical therapy, is important. Like, however, I say that if we ever do something and one person's life changes, it would be enough. Right. So like if someone hears this and decides to, try a yoga class or breathwork class or PT, that would be enough for doing this entire thing. And that's what more humans need to internalize. We don't do things for the masses. Like if we do things for the individual, that is how change is created. My life was changed by like one individual that taught me yoga or some class that I took just one time. And now I'm on an entirely different path. So someone listens to your podcast, they decide to go seek out a PT. They decide to become a PT, to go to get their DPT, like all that stuff. That's crazy, changing lives. And I thank you both for doing that.
Yeah, appreciate it. So definitely we're gonna have you come back on again, just talk about the breathwork stuff. But yeah, you've been awesome. So thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Appreciate you both.